Her red dress glittered under the ballroom lights, but by midnight she could barely keep her balance. The CEO everyone feared stumbled at the marble doors glassy-eyed and alone, while her employees looked away. Blake Turner was the only one who stepped forward, his voice steady against the backdrop of murmured conversations and clinking champagne flutes. "Ma'am, do you need a ride?" Diana Morgan's eyes narrowed, struggling to focus on the face before her. The man was familiar, one of her engineers, she thought vaguely. But in this moment, with the room tilting slightly beneath her feet, specifics escaped her. Her hand gripped the door-frame knuckles white against the polished marble. What was his name again, Turner? Blake Turner, the quiet one from R&D, who never scrambled for attention like the others. The ballroom behind them hummed with nervous energy as executives and employees alike pretended not to notice their fearsome leader's momentary weakness. A jazz quartet played in the corner, the muted trumpet notes floating above hushed whispers. Diana was acutely aware of how this single moment could unravel the reputation she'd spent 15 years building. The untouchable Diana Morgan, brought low by too many glasses of champagne. The annual gala was the kind of night everyone at Morgan Industries circled on their calendars, not because they loved it, but because attendance was mandatory for survival. Careers could be made or broken here in how one approached Diana Morgan, in whether one caught her eye or earned her rare nod of approval. Tonight, that careful dance of ambition had dissolved into uncomfortable silence as employees watched their CEO falter. Blake stood steady, his hand not quite touching her elbow, but close enough to catch her if needed. "I have a car waiting. Let me help you home." "It's late." Diana wanted to refuse to straighten her spine and walk out with the same commanding presence she'd maintained for years. But the room wouldn't stop spinning, and her assistant had vanished hours ago, likely assuming Diana would leave with her usual chauffeur, the chauffeur she'd dismissed earlier in a moment of stubborn independence. Across the ballroom, through the sea of averted gazes, Marcus Reed caught her eye. Her CFO, her friend, or so she'd thought. Just hours ago, she'd overheard him on the phone quietly discussing the benefits of Westfield's takeover offer. The betrayal still stung sharper than the headache building behind her temples. Is that why she'd kept drinking tonight? To dull the edge of that particular pain? "I don't need your charity, Turner." Diana's words slurred slightly. Her usual crisp diction softened at the edges. Blake didn't flinch. "It's not charity, ma'am. It's the right thing to do." Something in his tone, the complete absence of fear or opportunism, made her pause. Every interaction in her world came with strings attached with someone wanting something. This felt different. With a barely perceptible nod, she relented. The night air hit Diana's face like a slap as they stepped outside, momentarily clearing the fog in her mind. Blake's car was not what she expected. A modest sedan, at least 5 years old, meticulously maintained, but far from the luxury vehicles her executives favored. As he opened the passenger door, she hesitated, looking at the worn fabric seats. "It gets me where I need to go," Blake offered without apology or embarrassment, noticing her expression. Diana slid into the seat, her designer dress rustling against the fabric. As Blake rounded the car and took his place behind the wheel, a memory surfaced in her mind. A fragment of corporate biography she'd read once. Blake Turner, widowed 4 years ago. A daughter? What was her name? Something floral. Rose, no Lily. That was it. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving behind the glittering hotel and its watching eyes. Diana leaned her head against the cool window, the city lights blurring as they passed. In the confined space of the car, she was suddenly uncomfortably aware of herself, of the scent of expensive perfume mixing with the lingering sharpness of alcohol, of how small she felt outside the protective armor of her corner office. Blake drove in silence, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. His hands rested easily on the steering wheel, a plain silver wedding band still circling his left ring finger. 4 years a widower, yet still wearing the ring. Diana found herself wondering about the kind of love that would inspire such loyalty. The rhythmic motion of the car lulled Diana into a strange, vulnerable space between drunkenness and sobriety. "You know what nobody tells you about success, Turner? Everyone thinks it's about power, that once you reach the top, you're invincible." Her laugh was hollow, echoing in the small space. "But it's just a different kind of prison. They don't see me. They see the position, the power of the CEO, never just Diana." Blake's eyes remained on the road, but something in his expression shifted. I think everyone has their battles. Some are just better at hiding them than others. What's yours? The question slipped out before Diana could catch it, a breach of the professional distance she always maintained. Blake was quiet for so long that Diana thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady, each word carefully chosen. My wife, Emily, drunk driver 4 years ago. Now my battle is making sure my daughter grows up knowing she's not alone, that she has someone who will always be there no matter what. The simple truth of his words cut through Diana's champagne haze like ice water. In the glow of passing streetlights, she saw Blake Turner clearly for perhaps the first time, not as the quiet engineer who kept to himself, but as a man carved by grief refusing to be defined by it. Rain began to fall light at first, then heavier drumming against the roof of the car. Blake turned the wipers on their rhythmic sweep, matching the sudden heaviness in Diana's chest. For all her success, for all her wealth and power, when was the last time she'd been truly seen by another person? When was the last time someone had spoken to her with such unvarnished honesty? I'm sorry about your wife, she said finally, the words inadequate even to her own ears. Blake nodded once, acknowledging her words without needing more. The rest of the drive passed in silence, but it was a different quality of silence now. Not awkward, but shared. The city lights stretched ahead, endless and cold, while inside the car, two lives, one hardened by ambition, the other by loss, brushed against each other in silent recognition. Blake hadn't planned on attending the gala. These corporate functions, with their forced laughter and strategic conversations, were everything he'd grown to avoid since Emily's death. But attendance was mandatory, another item checked off the list of obligations that secured his paycheck. The paycheck that fed Lily, paid for her school supplies, her dance lessons, the life he was determined to give her, despite everything they'd lost. Earlier that evening, as he'd knotted his tie in the mirror, the same navy blue tie he wore to every function, Blake had found himself thinking about the path not taken. Before Emily's accident, he'd been on track for management. His designs had caught the attention of the previous CEO, and there had been talk of a promotion, of moving up from the engineering department to product development. He'd been ambitious once, hungry for recognition and advancement. Now that ambition felt like it belonged to someone else, a version of Blake Turner who had died alongside his wife on a rain-slicked road 4 years ago. These days he measured success differently. In Lily's smile and her report cards, in the way she was beginning to laugh, again without that shadow of loss in her eyes. Mrs. Harrison from next door had agreed to stay with Lily for the evening. A retired teacher with grown children of her own, she had a soft spot for the little girl who read books beyond her years and asked questions about everything. Blake trusted her implicitly, one of the few people he did trust with his daughter. Still, as he'd left for the gala, he'd felt that familiar tug of guilt. Another evening away, another bedtime story he wouldn't be there to read. Lily had stood in the doorway as he left, small in her pajamas with the constellation pattern. Bring me a chocolate, Dad. One of the fancy ones with the gold wrapper. I promise, Princess. Now remember bed by 9, even if Mrs. Harrison lets you watch that space documentary. As Blake guided his car through the rain-slicked streets of the financial district, Diana Morgan silent beside him, he thought of Lily, hopefully asleep by now, unaware that her father was currently driving the most powerful woman in the company home. The absurdity of it almost made him smile. Diana's penthouse was in one of those new glass towers that had transformed the city's skyline in recent years, all sharp angles and clean lines reaching toward the clouds as if trying to touch the stars. The doorman's eyes widened slightly as Blake helped Diana from the car, but professionalism quickly masked his surprise. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent, Diana leaning slightly against the wall, her earlier vulnerability now hidden behind a mask of composure. Blake kept a respectful distance, eyes fixed on the climbing floor numbers. When the door slid open, revealing a private foyer leading to a single door, Diana straightened, fumbling slightly with her clutch to retrieve her key. Blake didn't comment, simply waiting until she'd unlocked the door before speaking. You should drink some water. Take aspirin before bed. It'll help with tomorrow. Diana turned one hand on the doorframe. For a moment, she looked as if she might say something meaningful, something that acknowledged the strange intimacy of the evening. Instead, she nodded, her CEO mask firmly back in place. Thank you, Turner. Your discretion is appreciated. Blake simply nodded and turned back toward the elevator. No goodnight, no acknowledgement of the confidences exchanged in the car. Some doors once closed were better left that way. The drive home was longer than Blake expected, the late-night traffic surprisingly heavy for a weeknight. By the time he pulled into his modest driveway in the suburbs, it was well past midnight. The porch light was still on Mrs. Harrison's signal that all was well. She was reading in his living room, glasses perched on the end of her nose, a cup of tea gone cold on the side table. Everything okay with Lily Angel as always. She was asleep by 9:30, only a little negotiation required. Mrs. Harrison closed her book, marking her place carefully. Interesting night at the fancy party, Blake shrugged, helping the older woman with her coat. Same as always, rich people pretending to like each other. He didn't mention Diana Morgan, didn't mention the drive through rain-slicked streets or the unexpected confidences shared. Some stories weren't meant to be told, especially ones that felt unfinished. After Mrs. Harrison left, Blake checked on Lily, her small form curled beneath the quilt Emily had made during her pregnancy, dark hair spilling across the pillow. She slept with one arm wrapped around the stuffed otter that had been her companion since she was 2, her face peaceful in the glow of her nightlight. Blake stood in the doorway longer than necessary, watching the rise and fall of her chest, reassuring himself of her presence, her safety, her existence in a world that had taken so much else away. He hadn't forgotten the chocolate. Even in the strangeness of the evening, he'd remembered to slip one of the fancy truffles from the gala into his pocket. He placed it on her nightstand now, where it would be the first thing she saw in the morning. In his own bedroom, Blake didn't bother turning on the lights. He removed his tie, draping it over the chair, where his work clothes for tomorrow were already laid out. His routine was precise, unchanging alarm, set for 5:30 a.m., coffee ready to brew, Lily's lunch already packed in the refrigerator. The predictability was comforting, a framework that had helped him rebuild his life around the gaping hole Emily's death had left. As he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Blake found himself thinking about Diana Morgan. Not the powerful CEO everyone feared, but the woman in his car asking what nobody tells you about success with something like loneliness in her voice. He wondered if she'd take his advice about the water and aspirin. Wondered if tomorrow she'd acknowledge what had happened, or if the evening would be locked away, never to be mentioned again. Probably the latter. People like Diana Morgan didn't achieve their position by showing weakness even momentarily. By morning, he expected the walls would be firmly back in place, the vulnerability tucked away behind designer suits and sharp commands. Blake closed his eyes, pushing thoughts of Diana aside. Tomorrow would be another day of meetings and designs of picking Lily up from school and helping with homework, of navigating the careful balance he'd constructed. One unexpected evening wouldn't change that. Couldn't change that. He was wrong. The morning arrived with the insistent beeping of Blake's alarm, followed by the familiar routine shower coffee, gentle coaxing to get Lily out of bed and ready for school. She found the chocolate on her nightstand and beamed carefully, saving it for after breakfast. Because you always said sugar in the morning makes concentrating hard, Dad. The normalcy of the morning lulled Blake into thinking the previous night might fade like a strange dream. He dropped Lily at school with her usual reminder, "Be amazing today, princess," then headed to Morgan Industries, his mind already shifting to the project specifications waiting on his desk. The Morgan Industries headquarters dominated the downtown skyline, 50 stories of glass and steel designed to intimidate and impress. Blake had been working there for nearly a decade, starting in the engineering department fresh out of graduate school, back when Diana Morgan was still climbing the corporate ladder herself. He'd watched her rise through the ranks, transforming from ambitious executive to formidable CEO, restructuring the company with ruthless efficiency after her father's retirement. Blake parked in his usual spot, far from the reserved executive spaces near the entrance. He nodded to the security guard, swiped his badge at the turnstile, and took the elevator to the engineering department on the 12th floor. Normal, routine, exactly as expected. What wasn't expected was the email waiting in his inbox when he logged into his computer. From D. Morgan at morganindustries.com, subject meeting request, 8:30 a.m., my office. Then the timestamp showed it had been sent at 6:15 a.m. Blake checked his watch, 8:10 a.m. now. His stomach tightened. In 8 years, he'd never been summoned to the CEO's office, had never had direct communication from Diana Morgan at all beyond company-wide emails. Blake spent the next 15 minutes in a state of controlled anxiety, reviewing the previous night for any misstep, any offense. Had he been too familiar? Not respectful enough? Or was this simply Diana ensuring his silence about her moment of weakness? At 8:25, he took the executive elevator to the top floor, a space he'd never had reason to visit before. The reception area was a study in understated luxury, all clean lines and muted colors designed to convey power without ostentation. The receptionist, a poised woman with perfectly styled hair, looked up as he approached. "Blake Turner, I have an appointment with Ms. Morgan." The woman checked her screen, then nodded. "She's expecting you. You can go right in." Diana's office was larger than Blake's entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. She sat behind a glass desk, hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a charcoal suit that looked as if it cost more than Blake's monthly salary. If she was suffering from last night's indulgence, it didn't show on her face. "Turner," prompt as always. Diana gestured to the chair across from her desk, her expression unreadable. Blake sat his back straight, hands resting on his knees. He'd decided on the elevator ride up that he wouldn't speak, first wouldn't offer apologies or explanations until he understood why he was here. Diana studied him for a moment, her gaze direct and assessing. "I owe you my gratitude for last night. Your discretion and assistance were unexpected." Blake nodded once, acknowledging her words. "Just doing the right thing, ma'am." Diana's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. The right thing. How refreshingly uncomplicated. Her fingers tapped once against the glass surface of her desk. "Most people in this building would have seen an opportunity in my situation, a chance to curry favor or collect leverage. I'm not most people." The words came out more firmly than Blake intended, a hint of the pride he usually kept carefully contained. "No, you're not. That's becoming increasingly clear." Diana leaned back in her chair, something shifting in her demeanor. "Tell me, Turner, why are you still in the engineering department? Your file shows recommendations for advancement years ago, designs that were ahead of their time, yet you've turned down every opportunity for promotion." Blake hadn't expected this conversation, hadn't prepared to have his choices examined by the one person in the company whose scrutiny he'd successfully avoided for years. "I have priorities outside of work. My daughter needs stability, not a father who's never home." Diana's eyebrow arched slightly. "And you believe the two are mutually exclusive, that success requires sacrifice of family." The question hit too close to the choices Blake had made, the fears that drove them. He chose his words carefully. "I believe every person has to decide what success looks like for them. For me, it's being the parent my daughter needs." A flash of something, respect perhaps, or curiosity, crossed Diana's face. "A philosophy I haven't encountered often in these offices." She paused, seemed to come to a decision. "I saw the design you left with the aspirin, the modification to the production line." Blake blinked, momentarily confused. He'd scribbled that design on the back of a business card, a simple adjustment to the assembly process that had occurred to him weeks ago. He'd left it without much thought, an automatic response to seeing inefficiency that could be corrected. It could save us nearly 18% in production costs if implemented. Diana's tone was matter-of-fact, but her eyes were sharp on his face. "Why didn't you submit it through proper channels?" Blake shifted in his chair. "I did 3 months ago. It got lost somewhere in middle management." Diana's expression hardened slightly. "That seems to be happening with alarming frequency lately." She stood abruptly, moving to look out the window at the city below. "I have a project that requires someone with your particular talents, Turner. Someone who sees solutions where others see only process. Someone who values results over political maneuvering." Blake remained silent, unsure where this was heading. Diana turned back to face him. "You're aware of Westfield's recent acquisition attempts?" Everyone in the company was aware. Westfield Corporation had been circling Morgan Industries for months, making increasingly aggressive overtures. The business pages speculated endlessly about a hostile takeover, about Diana Morgan's ability to fend off the larger conglomerate. "Yes, ma'am. What isn't public knowledge is that they've gained support from some members of our board. Some believe selling is the most profitable option." Diana's voice was controlled, but Blake could hear the undercurrent of anger. "I disagree. This company was built by my father, and I rebuilt it after his retirement. I won't see it dismantled and absorbed by Westfield." Blake nodded, still uncertain of his role in this corporate drama. Diana returned to her desk, pressed a button on her computer. A schematic appeared on the wall screen. Designs for a new production facility more advanced than anything Morgan Industries currently operated. This is Project Phoenix, a complete overhaul of our manufacturing process. If successful, it would cut production costs by 30% while increasing output by 40%. It would make a Westfield acquisition financially pointless. The designs were impressive forward-thinking. Blake could see the potential immediately, but also the challenges. Why tell me this? Because you're going to lead the engineering team. Diana's tone made it clear this wasn't a request. You have the technical expertise, and more importantly, you are not entangled in the political web that's developed in upper management. I need someone I can trust to see this through without sabotage. Blake felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Professional pride at being chosen, anxiety about the responsibility, and immediate concern about how this would impact his time with Lily. Ms. Morgan, I'm flattered, but my situation at home will be accommodated. Diana cut him off smoothly. You'll have flexibility in your hours. Work from home when needed. I'm not asking you to sacrifice your daughter, Turner. I'm asking you to help save this company. The way she said it, help save this company, struck Blake as oddly personal, as if Morgan Industries was more than a corporate entity to her. Perhaps it was. Her father's legacy, her own life's work. Why me? There are more ambitious engineers, people who've been pursuing advancement. Diana's gaze was direct, unwavering. Because last night, when everyone else looked away, you didn't. You saw a person who needed help, not an opportunity or an embarrassment. That kind of clarity is rare, Turner, especially in these offices. Blake took a deep breath, weighing the offer. It was an incredible opportunity, professionally a chance to implement designs he'd been developing for years. But it would mean longer hours, more responsibility, less predictability in his carefully structured life with Lily. I need to think about it. Diana nodded, seemingly unsurprised by his hesitation. You have until tomorrow morning, and Turner. She fixed him with that penetrating gaze again. This conversation stays between us. Trust is in short supply these days. As Blake left the executive floor, his mind racing with the implications of Diana's offer, he failed to notice Marcus Reed watching from the end of the hallway, expression calculating as he observed the engineer emerging from the CEO's office. The engineering department was humming with activity when Blake returned. His colleagues bent over drafting tables or huddled around computer screens. No one seemed to notice his absence or returned, too absorbed in their own projects and deadlines. This had always suited Blake, the ability to work unobserved, to focus on solutions rather than office politics. Now, though, as he settled at his desk and tried to concentrate on the specifications for a minor component upgrade, Blake found his thoughts repeatedly drifting to Diana's offer. Project Phoenix, a complete manufacturing overhaul that could potentially save the company from acquisition, and she wanted him to lead it. 4 years ago, before Emily's death, he would have jumped at the opportunity without hesitation. It was everything the ambitious young engineer had wanted. Recognition, challenge, advancement. Now his first thought was of Lily, of bedtime routines disrupted and weekend plans potentially canceled for work emergencies. Yet something else nagged at him, a voice that sounded suspiciously like Emily's. You can't put your life on pause forever, Blake. Lily needs to see you living, not just existing. Emily had always been the braver one, pushing him to take chances, to reach beyond his comfort zone. She'd been the one to encourage him to apply to Morgan Industries in the first place, confident in his abilities even when he doubted himself. What would she say now? Would she urge him forward, or would she prioritize stability for their daughter? Blake was still wrestling with these thoughts when his phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Harrison. Emergency at my sister's. Can't pick up Lily from school today. So sorry for late notice. Blake checked the time, 11:30 a.m. Lily's school ended at 3:15, and he had a department meeting scheduled for 3 hours that he was expected to present at. Normally, in situations like this, he'd reach out to his backup childcare, a college student named Jen, who lived in the neighborhood. But she had finals this week and was unavailable. For a moment, Blake felt that familiar surge of panic, the reminder of how precarious his balancing act was, how easily it could all fall apart. This was exactly why taking on Project Phoenix seemed impossible. One emergency, one disruption to the careful schedule, and everything unraveled. He was about to email his department head, making up an excuse to reschedule the meeting, when he remembered Diana's words. You'll have flexibility in your hours. Work from home when needed. I'm not asking you to sacrifice your daughter. Was it possible could he take on this new challenge without shortchanging Lily? Or was Diana Morgan simply saying what she thought he needed to hear to accept the position? Blake rubbed his temples, feeling the beginnings of a headache. He needed more information before he could make a decision this important. And he needed to solve his immediate problem. Who would pick up Lily from school today? As if summoned by his thoughts, a new email appeared in his inbox. From D. Morgan at morganindustries.com, subject Project Phoenix. I've cleared your schedule for the afternoon. The preliminary designs are in the attached secure folder. Review them and we'll discuss your thoughts tomorrow. DM. Blake stared at the screen, momentarily stunned. How had she known? Had someone reported his panicked expression after receiving Mrs. Harrison's text? Or was this simply fortunate timing? Either way, it solved his immediate problem. He could pick up Lily himself, perhaps even review the designs with her doing homework nearby. It wouldn't be the first time his daughter had seen his work. She was surprisingly interested in engineering for an 8-year-old, asking thoughtful questions about how things were put together and why they worked the way they did. By the time Blake left the office, secure folder downloaded to his tablet, the sun had emerged from behind the morning clouds, casting the city in a warm glow that belied the crisp autumn air. He drove to Lily's school with the windows down, letting the fresh breeze clear his head. The elementary school was a cheerful building with colorful murals decorating the exterior walls, the work of past students preserved and added to each year. Blake parked and waited by the front gates, watching as parents began to gather for pickup time. He'd always been something of an anomaly here, one of the few fathers who regularly handled school pickup, and certainly the only single dad who was a primary caregiver rather than an occasional presence. In the beginning, after Emily's death, there had been pitying looks, awkward conversations that faltered when people remembered his situation. Now, 4 years later, he was simply Lily's dad, nodding hello to the other parents, many of whom he knew by name, if not well enough for real friendship. When the final bell rang and children began streaming out of the building, Blake scanned the crowd for Lily's dark hair and purple backpack. She emerged from the side door, deep in conversation with her best friend Zoe, her hands moving animatedly as she explained something. The moment she spotted Blake, her face lit up with surprise and delight. "Dad, you never pick me up on Tuesdays." Lily ran to him, backpack bouncing, and Blake felt that familiar surge of love and protectiveness that had become the cornerstone of his existence. "Hey, princess. Mrs. Harrison had an emergency, so you're stuck with me today." As they walked to the car, Lily's hand tucked trustingly in his, Blake found himself thinking again about Diana's offer. Would taking on Project Phoenix mean fewer moments like this, or could it mean building a more secure future for Lily, showing her that it was possible to pursue passion and ambition while still prioritizing family? He hadn't mentioned the meeting with Diana to Lily over dinner, focusing instead on her day at school, the science project. She was excited about the drama of who sat with whom at lunch. These small details of her life were important to him, threads in the tapestry of her childhood that he was determined not to miss. Later, with Lily settled at the kitchen table working on her math homework, Blake opened his tablet and began reviewing the Project Phoenix designs. They were even more impressive than he'd initially realized. A complete reimagining of the manufacturing process that incorporated several concepts Blake himself had proposed over the years, ideas that had been deemed too innovative or costly at the time. "Dad, what are you looking at?" Lily had abandoned her math worksheet and was peering over his shoulder, curious as always. Blake hesitated, then decided there was no harm in showing her the basic concept. "It's a new kind of factory. See how the assembly line is arranged in a circle instead of a straight line." Lily studied the design, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Like our class when we sit in a circle instead of rows, so everyone can see each other." Blake smiled at the simple but insightful comparison. "Exactly. It helps the machines work together better, just like it helps your class talk to each other better." Lily nodded, satisfied with the explanation, then returned to her homework. Blake watched her for a moment, struck by how much she resembled Emily, not just in her dark hair and serious eyes, but in the thoughtful way she approached problems, considering them from all angles before proceeding. Would Emily want him to take this opportunity to step back into the professional ambition he had set aside after her death? Or would she prioritize the stability he'd built for Lily, the predictable routines that had helped them both heal. As Blake returned to the designs, he found himself noticing elements that could be improved, efficiencies that could be increased. Almost without realizing it, he began making notes, sketching alternative configurations, the engineer in him responding to the challenge with an enthusiasm he hadn't felt in years. By the time Lily's bedtime arrived, Blake had filled several pages with notes and modifications. The project was fascinating, exactly the kind of complex, meaningful work he'd once dreamed of doing. And Diana Morgan was offering him the chance to lead it. Could he really say no? After tucking Lily in with the usual bedtime story and kiss goodnight, Blake returned to the kitchen table, spread his notes out, and made a decision. He would accept Diana's offer, but with conditions. Clear boundaries to protect his time with Lily. If Diana was serious about accommodating his family responsibilities, she would agree. If not, he would remain where he was, content in the balance he'd achieved. Decision made. Blake felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Tomorrow he would meet with Diana and give her his answer. Tonight he would allow himself to feel the excitement of a new challenge, a new beginning. The next morning arrived with unexpected complications. Lily woke with a slight fever. Nothing serious, but enough that Blake couldn't send her to school. One phone call to Mrs. Harrison confirmed she was still unavailable, and a second call to Jen, the babysitter, went straight to voicemail. Blake paced the kitchen, Lily curled on the couch with a book and a blanket, looking miserable but not dangerously ill. He needed to meet with Diana to discuss Project Phoenix and his conditions for accepting leadership, but he couldn't leave Lily alone. The careful structure of his life was crumbling around him exactly as he'd feared. With a sigh, he reached for his phone to call Diana's office to reschedule the meeting he hadn't even officially accepted yet. Before he could dial, a text message appeared on his screen. "Unknown number, Turner. This is Diana Morgan. Your meeting is still on. Bring your daughter. Car waiting outside in 30 minutes. Blake stared at the message, momentarily speechless. How had Diana known about Lily's illness? And why would she suggest bringing a sick child to a corporate headquarters before he could formulate a response? Another text arrived. "Unknown number, my assistant will arrange a comfortable space for her while we meet. She can rest, and you'll be nearby if needed. Non-negotiable." The tone was pure Diana Morgan, commanding, brooking no argument. Yet the content was unexpected, a consideration for his personal situation that seemed at odds with her fearsome reputation. 30 minutes later, Blake helped a pajama-clad Lily into the back seat of a sleek black car, her backpack filled with books and her tablet for entertainment. The driver, a discreet man in a dark suit, offered no conversation beyond a polite greeting, and Blake was grateful for the silence as he tried to process the strangeness of the situation. Lily, despite her illness, was wide-eyed with excitement at riding in what she whispered was a fancy spy car. Blake couldn't help but smile at her imagination, even as anxiety knotted his stomach. What would Diana Morgan make of his daughter, and what would Lily make of the intimidating CEO Morgan? Industry's headquarters seemed different with Lily beside him, her small hand in his as they crossed the lobby. The security guards, the rushing employees, the gleaming surfaces, all were transformed through her wondering eyes, becoming a landscape of adventure rather than corporate ambition. The executive elevator whisked them to the top floor where Diana's assistant, a different woman from yesterday, Blake noted, greeted them with unexpected warmth. "Ms. Morgan is on a call, but she'll be ready shortly, and this must be Lily." The assistant bent slightly to address the little girl directly. "We have a special room all set up for you with books and a television and even a place to rest if you're feeling tired." Lily, normally shy with strangers, seemed intrigued rather than intimidated. "Is it Miss Morgan's office, the one from Dad's picture?" Blake froze, momentarily confused. He didn't have a picture of Diana's office. Didn't have a picture of Diana at all, as far as he knew. The assistant looked equally confused, glancing between father and daughter. "Why don't I show you the room and then your dad can go see Ms. Morgan?" The special room turned out to be a small but comfortable conference room adjacent to Diana's office, transformed with pillows and blankets on the sofa, a stack of children's books on the table, and a television quietly playing a nature documentary. A pitcher of water and a plate of crackers sat nearby, simple foods for a child with an upset stomach. The thoughtfulness of the arrangement surprised Blake. This wasn't the cold efficiency he'd expected from Diana Morgan's office, but something almost maternal. Lily settled onto the sofa, already reaching for one of the books. Are you going to be okay here, Princess? I'll be right next door if you need anything. Lily nodded, already engrossed in the book she'd selected. I'm fine, Dad. Go have your meeting about the Circle factory. Blake smiled, brushing a kiss against her forehead. Not too warm. The fever seemed to be receding. Be good. Okay. As Blake turned to leave, Lily looked up from her book, her expression suddenly serious. Dad is Miss Morgan, the lady from the picture on your desk, the one in the red dress. Blake blinked, momentarily confused. He didn't keep personal photos on his desk at work, and certainly none of Diana Morgan. I don't have a picture of Ms. Morgan, Lily. Lily's brow furrowed. But I saw it when I visited your office for Take Your Kid to Work Day, the pretty lady in the red dress. You said she was your boss. Understanding dawned. Lily was referring to the company newsletter, which had featured a photo of Diana Maeve at last year's gala, wearing a red dress similar to the one she'd worn last night. The newsletter had been on Blake's desk during Lily's visit to the office, and he'd absently identified Diana as the boss when Lily had asked. That's right, Princess. That's Ms. Morgan, but I don't keep her picture on my desk. He kept his tone light, aware of the assistant still hovering nearby, likely taking in every word of this exchange. Lily shrugged, already returning to her book. She looks nicer in person. Blake left her, then following the assistant to Diana's office, wondering what his daughter had seen in Diana Morgan that others missed, or that Diana herself kept carefully hidden behind her intimidating exterior. Diana was standing at the window when Blake entered her, back to the door, silhouetted against the morning sun. Unlike yesterday's severe suit today, she wore a deep blue dress that softened her appearance slightly without diminishing her authority. Your daughter seems remarkably self-possessed. Diana turned from the window, her expression thoughtful. 8 years old, correct? Blake nodded, momentarily thrown by Diana's interest in Lily. Thank you for accommodating her today. It was unexpected. Diana gestured to the chair across from her desk, taking her own seat. I meant what I said about flexibility, Turner. This company has lost too many talented people to rigid policies that ignore the reality of human lives. It was not what Blake had expected from the CEO, known for her uncompromising standards and demanding work ethic. He studied her face, looking for signs of the vulnerability he'd glimpsed in the car 2 nights ago, but her expression was composed, professional. I've reviewed the Project Phoenix designs. Blake began, deciding to focus on business rather than the puzzling contradictions of Diana Morgan. They're impressive, but I see room for improvement in the circular assembly configuration. Diana leaned forward, slightly interest, sharpening her gaze. Show me. For the next hour, they discussed the project in detail, Blake outlining his proposed modifications, while Diana asked incisive questions that pushed him to clarify and refine his thinking. It was the most intellectually stimulating conversation Blake had had in years, reminding him of why he'd loved engineering in the first place. The challenge of solving complex problems, of making something work better, more efficiently. Throughout the discussion, Blake was aware of a subtle shift in Diana's demeanor toward him, a respect that hadn't been there before, an acknowledgement of his expertise that went beyond the usual corporate hierarchy. She listened to his suggestions, not as a superior humoring a subordinate, but as a colleague valuing his insight. As their discussion wound down, Diana leaned back in her chair. You haven't given me your answer yet, Turner. Will you lead Project Phoenix? Blake took a deep breath, the moment of decision upon him. I'd like to accept, but I have conditions. Diana's eyebrow arched slightly, but she didn't seem surprised. I'm listening. I need guaranteed flexibility for my daughter's needs, school events, doctor appointments, sick days. I won't miss the important moments of her childhood, even for a project this significant. Diana nodded, her expression neutral. Reasonable? What else? I want to build my own team, choosing engineers based on talent and work ethic, not seniority or political connections. That might ruffle some feathers in middle management. Diana's tone was dry, almost amused. But I agree. This project can't afford to be bogged down by politics. Anything else? Blake hesitated, then decided to voice the concern that had been nagging at him since yesterday. Why me? There are more senior engineers, people with management experience. I've been deliberately avoiding advancement for years. Diana was quiet for a moment, studying him with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see more than Blake was comfortable revealing. You want to know if this is because of the other night? If I'm choosing you out of some misplaced sense of obligation or gratitude? Blake didn't answer, but his expression must have confirmed her assessment. Diana sighed, a small break in her composed facade. Turner. I was aware of your work long before you drove me home from that gala. Your designs have been consistently innovative, your solutions elegant. I've wondered for years why you weren't in a more senior position. She stood moving to the window again, her back to him as she continued. What the other night showed me was your character, not your technical ability. In a company increasingly divided by ambition and self-interest, you act from principle. That's rare, and it's exactly what Project Phoenix needs. Someone who will see it through because it's the right thing to do, not because it advances their career or political agenda. The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable, catching Blake off guard. For all her reputation as a calculating businesswoman in this moment, Diana Morgan seemed genuinely concerned with the integrity of her company, with building something that would last beyond quarterly profits. Before Blake could respond, a soft knock at the door interrupted them. Diana's assistant entered, looking apologetic. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Miss Morgan, but Mr. Reed is insisting on seeing you. He says it's urgent regarding the Westfield situation." Diana's expression hardened slightly at the mention of Marcus Reed, but she nodded. "Tell him I'll be available in 10 minutes. As the assistant withdrew, Diana turned back to Blake. "Have I addressed your concerns, Turner? Will you take on Project Phoenix?" Blake thought of Lily in the next room of the balance he'd worked so hard to maintain these past 4 years. He thought of Emily, who had always believed in his abilities, even when he doubted himself. And he thought of Diana Morgan offering him not just a professional opportunity, but a chance to be part of something meaningful, something built on principle rather than just profit. "Yes, I'll do it, but I'll need to explain to my daughter why our routines will be changing. She depends on predictability." Diana nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Understandable. Children need security, especially after loss." Something in the way she said it, a hint of personal knowledge beneath the professional observation, made Blake wonder about Diana's own history. Had she experienced loss herself? Was that part of what drove her relentless ambition? Her determination to protect her father's company? Before he could consider it further, Diana was moving on all business again. "We'll announce your appointment tomorrow. Today, take your daughter home, let her rest. Tomorrow, we begin." Blake stood, recognizing the dismissal in her tone. As he reached the door, Diana spoke again, her voice different somehow. Less the CEO, more the woman he'd glimpsed that night in his car. "Turner, thank you for seeing me home the other night, and for the aspirin. It helped." Blake nodded, acknowledging the gratitude without making it awkward for either of them. "Sometimes the small kindnesses matter most, Miss Morgan." Something like a genuine smile touched Diana's lips, transforming her face for a brief moment before the professional mask slipped back into place. "Indeed they do. Now go take care of your daughter." As Blake collected Lily from the conference room, he was surprised to find her deep in conversation with the assistant who was showing her something on a tablet, pictures of what appeared to be a garden. "That's where my mom used to take me," the assistant was saying. "She loved orchids, especially. I like sunflowers best." Lily replied, her earlier shyness completely gone. They follow the sun all day, like they're watching it move across the sky. Ready to go home, Princess Blake interrupted gently, noting with relief that Lily seemed more energetic, her fever apparently subsided. Lily gathered her things, thanking the assistant with the politeness Blake had worked hard to instill. As they walked toward the elevator, Lily looked up at him, her expression serious in that way that always reminded him of Emily. "Are you going to my work with Ms. Morgan tomorrow, Dad? On the Circle Factory?" Blake nodded, watching her face carefully for signs of distress at the change in their routine. "Yes, I am. It means some things will be different. I might work later, some days, or have to come in early sometimes. But I'll always be there for the important stuff." "Okay," Lily considered this, her brow furrowed in thought. "Will you be happier, working on something you really like instead of the boring stuff?" The question caught Blake off guard, a child's insight cutting straight to the heart of the matter. He hadn't realized Lily was aware of his professional dissatisfaction, the sense of marking time rather than moving forward. "I think I might be princess, but you're still the most important thing. If it gets too hard to balance, we'll figure something else out." Lily nodded, satisfied with his answer. "Then I think you should do it. Mom always said you were the smartest engineer she knew. She'd want you to build cool things." The mention of Emily so matter-of-fact from Lily's lips brought a lump to Blake's throat. She was right, of course. Emily had always pushed him to reach for more, to use his talents fully. She would have approved of Project Phoenix of the challenge it represented. As they left Morgan Industries and stepped into the autumn sunshine, Blake felt something shift inside him, a weight lifting, a door opening. For 4 years, he'd been surviving, focused solely on creating stability for Lily after the chaos of loss. Perhaps now it was time to start living again, to show his daughter that grief didn't have to define their future. What he couldn't have known as he helped Lily into the car and turned toward home was that accepting leadership of Project Phoenix would draw him further into Diana Morgan's world than he'd ever intended, and that the carefully constructed walls both of them had built around their hearts were about to face challenges neither was prepared for. In her office, Diana watched the black car pull away from the building, carrying Blake and his daughter home. Something about the sight stirred an emotion she rarely allowed herself to acknowledge, a wistfulness for a life she'd chosen to sacrifice in pursuit of her ambitions. She'd meant what she told Blake about his engineering talent, about needing someone with integrity to lead Project Phoenix. What she hadn't said was how much his quiet strength had affected her, how his unassuming kindnesses had breached defenses she'd spent years constructing. Diana turned away from the window as her intercom buzzed, announcing Marcus Reed's arrival. She straightened her shoulders, professional mask firmly in place once more. Whatever unexpected feelings Blake Turner stirred in her, they would have to wait. Right now she had a company to save, and a growing suspicion that Marcus, once her closest ally, was no longer on her side. The game was becoming more dangerous, the stakes higher than ever, and now Blake Turner and his daughter were unwittingly stepping into the center of it all. Diana squared her shoulders and opened the door to face Marcus, unaware that the security camera in the hallway had captured Blake's earlier arrival with Lily. Footage that would soon make its way into the wrong hands, complicating an already precarious situation. Diana's reflection stared back at her from the bathroom mirror, searching for signs of weakness. The woman who had built Morgan Industries into a powerhouse couldn't afford vulnerability, especially not now with Westfield circling like vultures. Yet something had shifted 2 nights ago in Blake Turner's modest car, a crack in the armor she'd spent decades constructing. The aspirin bottle on her marble countertop was still where she'd left it after that night. She hadn't needed it since, but couldn't bring herself to put it away. Such a small thing, a simple act of consideration. When was the last time someone had thought of her comfort without an agenda? Diana straightened her silk blouse, brushed an invisible speck from her tailored pants. Today, they would announce Blake's appointment as Project Phoenix lead. Today, the real work would begin. She refused to acknowledge the small flutter of anticipation at seeing him again, at the prospect of working closely with the one person in the company who had seen her at her worst and treated her with dignity rather than opportunism. Sentiment was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not with Marcus Reed's thinly veiled threats still echoing from yesterday's confrontation. "You're making a mistake trusting Turner with Phoenix," Marcus had said, his handsome face arranged in an expression of concern that didn't reach his eyes. "He has no management experience, no political capital. The board will question your judgment." Diana had met his gaze coolly. "The board will see results. That's all that matters." Marcus had leaned forward, then voice dropping. "Some interesting security footage crossed my desk this morning. Turner bringing his daughter to your office. People might wonder about such special treatment." The implied threat had been clear. Marcus was watching, collecting ammunition. Diana had dismissed him with a wave of her hand, refusing to show how his words had landed. But the warning was received. The stakes were rising, and Blake Turner, unwittingly or not, was now a pawn in a dangerous game. Blake arrived at Morgan Industries earlier than usual. Lily safely at school and feeling much better. The weight of his new responsibility sat differently than he'd expected. Not as a burden, but as a challenge he was surprisingly eager to face. 4 years of playing it safe, of deliberately limiting his professional ambitions, had left a void he hadn't fully acknowledged until Diana's offer had filled it. The elevator doors opened on the 12th floor, and Blake immediately sensed a shift in the atmosphere. Conversations hushed as he passed colleagues watching with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed resentment. News traveled fast in corporate America. Michael Chen, a fellow engineer and the closest thing Blake had to a friend at work, fell into step beside him. "So it's true you're heading up the mysterious Project Phoenix," Blake nodded, uncomfortable with the attention. "Official announcement later today." Michael whistled low. That's quite a leap from component design to leading the company's most critical initiative. His tone was light, but Blake caught the undercurrent of confusion, perhaps even hurt. You never seemed interested in climbing the ladder before. Blake unlocked his office door, the same modest space he'd occupied for years soon to be exchanged for something more befitting his new role. Things change, Mike. Michael leaned against the doorframe, studying him. Because of her, the woman in red who needed a ride home, Blake's head snapped up, shock and alarm coursing through him. He kept his voice carefully neutral. What are you talking about? Michael shrugged, his expression somewhere between amused and concerned. Security footage gets around when it's interesting enough. You helping our illustrious So into your car after the gala, her looking decidedly less composed than usual. People are talking, Blake. The implications hit Blake like a physical blow. His private moment of decency toward Diana was being twisted into something tawdry, something transactional. And worse, much worse, it was being used to undermine the professional opportunity he'd just accepted. People would say he'd earned his promotion not through talent or hard work, but through opportunism. Before Blake could formulate a response, his phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number, my office. Now. Diana was standing at the window when Blake entered, her posture rigid, contained energy vibrating just beneath the surface. She turned as the door closed behind him, her expression carefully neutral. The security footage from the gala has made the rounds, it seems. Her voice was cool, professional, betraying none of the vulnerability he'd witnessed that night. We have a problem. Blake nodded, still processing the implications himself. Michael just mentioned it. People are drawing their own conclusions. Diana moved to her desk, pressed a button on her computer. The wall screen illuminated with the Project Phoenix timeline, an organizational chart, Blake's name prominently displayed at the top of the engineering team. This is too important to be derailed by office gossip. The announcement goes forward as planned. Blake studied her face, searching for any hint of the woman he'd glimpsed beneath the CEO facade. Do you want me to step down? If my involvement compromises the project, absolutely not. Diana's response was immediate, her tone brooking no argument. You're the right person for this job, Turner. I won't let Marcus Reed's machinations change that. Blake raised an eyebrow, pieces falling into place. Reed is behind the footage leak. Diana's mouth tightened. He came to me yesterday with thinly veiled threats. He's aligned himself with the board members who favor the Westfield acquisition. Project Phoenix threatens that plan. The larger game suddenly became clear to Blake. He wasn't just being asked to lead an engineering initiative. He was being drawn into a corporate power struggle with Diana on one side and Marcus Reed on the other. The implications were dizzying. What do you need from me? Blake kept his voice steady, professional, though his mind was racing with the potential consequences for his career, for his carefully structured life with Lily. Diana's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Just do your job, Turner. Build something remarkable. Let me handle Marcus and the board. As Blake left Diana's office, the weight of his new reality settled more firmly on his shoulders. He had accepted Project Phoenix, believing it was simply a professional challenge, a chance to use his engineering talents to their fullest. Now he understood it was much more, a battlefield in a corporate war with his reputation and Diana's leadership hanging in the balance. The official announcement came at noon, an all-company email introducing Blake as the Project Phoenix lead, outlining the initiative's importance to Morgan Industries' future. By 1 o'clock, Blake's old office was packed into boxes, his new space, a corner office on the executive floor, waiting to be claimed. By 3 o'clock, Blake had assembled his initial team, selecting engineers based on talent rather than seniority, as he'd stipulated to Diana. The choice ruffled feathers, particularly with Stephen Walsh, the department head, who had consistently buried Blake's innovative designs for years. You're making enemies, Turner. Stephen's voice was low, dangerous, as Blake informed him of the team's selections. I've been at Morgan Industries for 20 years. You can't just sweep in and disregard the established order. Blake met the older man's gaze directly. I'm selecting the best people for a critical project. Your engineers Zoe Patel and James Wilson are on that list because of their talent, not their time served. Stephen's face flushed with anger. You'll regret this. You and your special relationship with Diana Morgan. The insinuation hung in the air between them, ugly and explicit now. Blake felt a surge of anger, not just for himself, but for Diana, a woman whose hard-earned accomplishments were being reduced to sexist gossip by men who couldn't match her vision or her drive. Project Phoenix needs the best, Blake said, finally his voice leveled despite the anger coursing through him. I won't compromise that for politics or bruised egos. As Stephen stormed away, Blake caught sight of Marcus Reed watching from across the floor, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The battle lines were being drawn, and Blake was squarely in the crosshairs. By 5 o'clock, when Blake left to pick up Lily from her after-school program, the exhaustion of the day weighed heavily on him. His daughter's bright chatter about her science project and the playground politics of third grade was a welcome respite from the corporate minefield he had been navigating. At home, as Lily sprawled on the living room floor with her homework and Blake prepared dinner, his phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number, first Phoenix team meeting, 8 a.m. tomorrow. I'll be there. DM. Blake added Diana's number to his contacts, a small action that felt strangely significant. Until 2 days ago, Diana Morgan had been a distant figure the imperious CEO glimpsed in company meetings or corporate communications. Now she was a direct message on his phone, a presence that was rapidly becoming more complex than he'd ever anticipated. That night, after Lily was asleep, Blake sat at his kitchen table reviewing the Project Phoenix files Diana had sent over. The designs were ambitious, revolutionary even, but they required refinement, practical engineering solutions to theoretical concepts. This was where Blake excelled, in the meticulous transformation of ideas into reality. As he worked making notes and sketching modifications, Blake found himself fully engaged in a way he hadn't been since before Emily's death. The challenge absorbed him, called to the part of himself he deliberately suppressed, while focusing on being a stable present father to Lily. It was nearly midnight when Blake finally closed the files and headed to bed. As he passed Lily's room, he paused, peering in at his daughter's sleeping form. The moonlight spilled through her window, illuminating the stuffed otter clutched in her arms, the dark hair spread across her pillow. Everything I do is for you, Princess Blake thought, a fierce wave of love washing over him. And maybe, just maybe this time, that includes doing something for myself too. The next morning brought a new routine. Mrs. Harrison arriving earlier to help get Lily ready for school, Blake leaving for work before his daughter was even awake. The change felt jarring, a disruption to the careful balance he'd maintained for years. But Mrs. Harrison had assured him that Lily understood that she was proud of her dad's new important job building the Circle factory. Still, as Blake drove to Morgan Industries in the pre-dawn darkness, doubt gnawed at him. Was he making the right choice? Was Project Phoenix worth the sacrifice of his carefully constructed life? The executive floor was quiet when Blake arrived, most of the senior staff not due in for another hour. He used the time to set up his new office, arranging his modest belongings in the spacious corner suite that still felt like it belonged to someone else. The last item from the box was the small framed photo of Lily he kept on his desk. His daughter beaming from the Ferris wheel at last year's state fair, her face alight with joy. You've taken on quite a challenge, Turner. Blake looked up to find Diana standing in his doorway earlier than expected and watching him with an unreadable expression. Her suit today was charcoal gray, her only concession to femininity, a delicate silver necklace at her throat. Blake set the photo of Lily on his desk, turning it slightly so it faced his chair. It'll be worth it if we succeed. Diana entered the office, her gaze falling on the photo of Lily. Your daughter has your eyes. Her voice softened slightly, the corporate mask slipping just a fraction. She must be missing your morning routine today. The observation, so perceptive, so unexpectedly personal, caught Blake off guard. He hadn't expected Diana Morgan to consider the domestic disruptions his new role would cause, let alone comment on them. She understands this is important, Blake said, though the reassurance felt more for himself than for Diana. She's resilient like her mother was. Diana nodded, her expression thoughtful. Children often are more adaptable than we give them credit for. It's the parents who struggle with change. Before Blake could respond to this surprisingly insightful comment, Diana was all business again, moving toward the conference room where the Phoenix team would gather. She paused at the door, glancing back at him. Lead with confidence today, Turner. This team needs to believe in your vision from the start. The meeting began precisely at 8, the conference room filled with the engineers Blake had selected, some eager, others clearly skeptical of their new leader. Diana sat at the far end of the table, observer rather than participant, her presence adding a weight of authority to Blake's new position. As Blake outlined the project goals and his approach to achieving them, he felt a familiar confidence returning. the self-assurance of an engineer in his element, tackling problems he was uniquely qualified to solve. This wasn't about corporate politics or power struggles. This was about building something revolutionary, something that could secure Morgan Industries' future. I've selected each of you because your work demonstrates innovation, precision, and a willingness to challenge conventional approaches. Blake moved to the digital whiteboard, bringing up the circular manufacturing design that was Phoenix's cornerstone. This isn't just about efficiency. It's about reimagining how production can work. Together, we're going to build the future of manufacturing. As the team began to engage, asking questions and offering insights, Blake caught Diana watching him, a hint of approval in her usually guarded expression. For a moment, their eyes met across the conference room, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Whatever external pressures they faced, from Marcus Reed, from the board, from the circulating security footage, the work itself was real important, and within this room, they were aligned in purpose. The next weeks fell into a demanding but exhilarating rhythm. Blake arrived at Morgan Industries before dawn and left after dark, his time with Lily compressed into bedtime stories and weekend adventures. The guilt he felt at his absences was partially offset by his daughter's unexpected pride in his new role. She had taken to telling her friends and teachers that her dad was building the future, a phrase Blake recognized from Project Phoenix's internal marketing materials. Diana's presence was a constant, though often at a careful distance. She attended key meetings, reviewed progress reports, and occasionally stopped by Blake's office late in the evening when most of the staff had gone home. These quiet conversations, ostensibly about project details, gradually evolved to include broader topics: manufacturing philosophies, engineering innovations, even occasional mentions of their personal lives. "I never wanted to run my father's company," Diana admitted one night, perched on the edge of Blake's desk as they reviewed the latest prototype results. "I wanted to design aircraft, studied aerospace engineering before my father's health forced me to join the family business." Blake looked up from the schematics, surprised by this personal revelation. The image of Diana Morgan as a young engineering student dreaming of flight rather than corporate boardrooms shifted his perception of her yet again. "What happened?" Blake asked, genuinely curious about the path that had led her to become the formidable CEO rather than the engineer she'd apparently aspired to be. Diana's smile held a hint of old regret. "Life happened. My father's first heart attack. The company struggling. Someone had to step in, and I was the only child." She shrugged, the gesture incongruously casual for her usually controlled demeanor. "Dreams adjust to reality, Turner. You know that better than most." The reference to his own abandoned ambitions after Emily's death hung in the air between them, neither acknowledging it directly, but both aware of the parallel. Two people who had set aside personal dreams for larger responsibilities. Diana for her father's company, Blake for his daughter. The moment of connection was broken by Diana's phone buzzing with a message. Her expression hardened as she read it, the brief glimpse of the woman beneath the CEO vanishing beneath her professional mask. "The board is calling an emergency meeting tomorrow. Marcus has been busy." Blake felt a chill at her words. The corporate battle had receded somewhat in his consciousness as he'd immersed himself in Phoenix's engineering challenges. Now it rushed back, a reminder that their work existed within a larger, more treacherous context. "What can I do?" Blake asked, instinctively wanting to help, though unsure what assistance he could offer in the realm of boardroom politics. Diana's gaze was direct, unflinching. "Have the first prototype ready for demonstration in 2 weeks instead of 4. Show them Phoenix isn't just theory, it's reality." The timeline was nearly impossible. The team was making remarkable progress, but the accelerated schedule would require round-the-clock work sacrifices Blake wasn't sure his engineers would be willing to make. "I'll find a way," Blake promised, already mentally recalculating timelines, resource allocations, the personal cost to himself and his team, and to Lily. Diana nodded, once her faith in him apparent and somewhat daunting. "I know you will, Turner. That's why you're here." As she left his office, Blake sat in the sudden silence, the weight of her expectations heavy on his shoulders. 2 weeks to produce what should take 4. 2 more weeks of barely seeing Lily. 2 weeks to potentially save Diana's position, Project Phoenix, and his own career. The challenge would have been merely difficult under normal circumstances. But as Blake was about to discover, circumstances were about to become anything but normal. The call came 3 days later as Blake was deep in negotiations with suppliers for the prototype components. Mrs. Harrison's voice was tight with concern. Lily had collapsed during PE class. The school nurse suspected appendicitis. An ambulance was on its way. Blake's world narrowed to a single point of fear. He left the supplier meeting without explanation, ignoring the calls of his confused team members. His only thought was reaching his daughter, being there when she needed him most. As he raced toward his car, he collided with Diana in the hallway, nearly knocking her over in his haste. "Turner, what's happening?" Diana steadied herself, taking in his panic-stricken expression. "Lily's being taken to the hospital. Possible appendicitis. I have to go." The words tumbled out his mind, already racing ahead to the hospital, to his daughter in pain and afraid. Diana's response was immediate, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I'll drive you. You're in no condition." Her hand on his arm was firm, guiding him toward the executive elevator. "Which hospital?" "St. Luke's Children's." Blake surrendered to her decisiveness, too concerned about Lily to question why the CEO of Morgan Industries was personally driving him to the hospital. Diana's car was sleek and powerful, her driving precise despite the speed. Blake sat rigid in the passenger seat, his phone clutched in his hand as he waited for updates from Mrs. Harrison, who was meeting the ambulance at the hospital. "She'll be all right, Turner. Children are remarkably resilient." Diana's voice was calm, a steadying presence amid Blake's rising panic. "Medicine has come a long way. If it is appendicitis, the surgery is routine." Blake nodded mutely, unable to form words around the fear constricting his throat. All he could think of was Lily in pain, Lily afraid, Lily needing him and him not being there. He'd promised her after Emily died that he would always be there when she needed him. Always. Diana glanced at him, seeming to read his thoughts. "You're going to be there for her. We're 10 minutes out. She's not alone. The school nurse is with her, and your Mrs. Harrison will meet her." "You haven't failed her, Blake." The use of his first name, so unexpected, so intimate after months of professional Turner, penetrated Blake's panic. He looked at Diana, really seeing her for the first time since receiving Mrs. Harrison's call. Her expression was focused, but compassionate, a side of her he glimpsed only in rare, unguarded moments. "Thank you," he managed, finally, the words inadequate for what her presence meant in this moment of crisis. Diana nodded once, eyes returning to the road as she navigated through traffic with single-minded purpose. Project Phoenix can wait. Family comes first. By the time they reached St. Luke's, Lily had been admitted and was being prepared for emergency surgery. The diagnosis was indeed appendicitis, the doctor explained, fortunately caught before the appendix could rupture. The procedure was routine, the prognosis excellent. Blake stood at Lily's bedside, his daughter small and pale against the hospital sheets, but still managing a brave smile for her father. "You came," she whispered, relief evident in her voice despite the pain medication beginning to take effect. "I'll always come, Princess, always." Blake squeezed her hand gently, forcing confidence into his voice that he didn't entirely feel. "The doctors are going to fix you right up, okay? I'll be waiting when you wake up." As the nurses prepared to take Lily to surgery, Blake stepped back, watching helplessly as his daughter was wheeled away. The fear that had propelled him from Morgan Industries transformed into a different kind of anguish, the particular helplessness of a parent who cannot protect their child from pain. He was so focused on Lily's departing gurney that he didn't immediately register Diana's presence beside him, steady and unexpectedly comforting. "Come sit down, Blake." She guided him toward the waiting area, her hand light on his elbow. "The surgery will take about an hour. You need to breathe." Blake allowed himself to be led to an uncomfortable plastic chair, his body suddenly heavy with fear and exhaustion. Diana sat beside him, her usual commanding presence softened, more human in the fluorescent harshness of the hospital lights. "She'll be all right," Diana repeated, her certainty a lifeline Blake desperately needed. "The doctor said it was caught early. Children recover quickly." Blake nodded, trying to take comfort in her words. "She's all I have." The admission escaped before he could stop it, raw with emotion. Diana was quiet for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. She's lucky to have a father who would drop everything for her. Not all children have that. Something in her pawn, a hint of old pain perhaps, made Blake look at her more closely. For all their conversations these past weeks, Diana remained largely a mystery to him. He knew almost nothing about her childhood, her life outside Morgan Industries. Before he could respond, a familiar voice cut through the hospital hum. "Blake." Oh, thank heavens I found you. Mrs. Harrison hurried toward them, her normally neat appearance slightly disheveled from her rush to the hospital. She stopped short at the sight of Diana, clearly recognizing the CEO from news coverage or company materials. Mrs. Harrison Blake rose to greet his neighbor, oddly grateful for her steadying presence. Lily's in surgery. They caught it early. Mrs. Harrison nodded, patting his arm with a maternal concern. She's a strong girl, our Lily. She'll be just fine. Her gaze slid curiously to Diana, who had remained seated, observing their interaction with interest. This is Diana Morgan Blake, said belatedly, making introductions. My boss. She drove me here. The slight hesitation before boss didn't escape Mrs. Harrison's notice, her eyebrows rising slightly, but she extended her hand to Diana with the warm politeness that characterized all her interactions. Eleanor Harrison, I help with Lily when Blake's working, which seems to be quite a lot these days, she added with gentle reproach directed at Blake. Diana accepted Mrs. Harrison's hand, her usual corporate reserve giving way to something more genuine. Blake speaks highly of you, Mrs. Harrison. Lily is fortunate to have such a caring neighbor. The simple acknowledgement of Mrs. Harrison's importance in their lives and Diana's recognition of it eased some of the tension in the air. The three settled into the waiting area, an unlikely trio united in concern for Lily. As promised, the surgery took just under an hour. The doctor emerged with good news. A successful, uncomplicated procedure. Lily would need to stay overnight for observation, but could likely go home tomorrow. She was in recovery now, still groggy from anesthesia, but Blake could see her shortly. The relief was so profound that Blake's knees nearly buckled. Mrs. Harrison squeezed his arm, her own relief evident in her misty eyes. What happens now? Diana asked, her practical nature asserting itself. Will she need specialized care at home? For how long Blake had been so focused on the immediate crisis that he hadn't thought ahead to Lily's recovery. The doctor mentioned bed rest for a few days, then limited activity for a week or two. I'll need to take time off work. The words hung in the air between them, the unspoken implications clear. Project Phoenix was already on an accelerated timeline. Blake's absence would further complicate their chances of meeting the board's deadline. Diana nodded, her expression thoughtful rather than concerned. We'll manage. Your team can handle the day-to-day for a week. You focus on Lily's recovery, the simple acceptance of his family needs, prioritizing Lily over the project Diana had staked so much on, shifted something in Blake's perception of her once again. This wasn't the ruthless CEO of company legend demanding sacrifice for corporate goals. This was someone who understood on a fundamental level that some things mattered more than business success. Mrs. Harrison, watching this exchange with keen eyes, seemed to come to a decision. I'll stay with Lily during the days while Blake's at work. My sister can manage without me for a week. Her tone brooked no argument, the matter settled in her mind. Blake started to protest. Mrs. Harrison had already done so much for them, but she waved him off with the authority of a woman who had raised 4 children of her own. Lily needs familiar faces during recovery, not some stranger from a service. I'm happy to help. Besides, she promised to teach me that space game on her tablet. Now go see your daughter Blake. She'll be asking for you. As Blake headed toward recovery, he glanced back to see Diana and Mrs. Harrison seated side by side, an unlikely pair, but somehow not as incongruous as he might have expected. Diana Morgan, the powerful CEO, and Eleanor Harrison, the retired teacher. 2 strong women from different worlds finding common ground in their concern for Lily. Lily was pale and groggy when Blake reached her bedside, but her smile at seeing him was the most beautiful sight he'd ever witnessed. Hey, princess. How are you feeling? Lily's voice was small, scratchy from the breathing tube. Did they really take out my appendix? Can I see it? The question, so perfectly wonderfully Lily in its curiosity, made Blake laugh despite his lingering fear. I'm afraid they don't let you keep it, sweetheart. But maybe the doctor will show you a picture if you ask nicely. As Lily drifted back to sleep, the medication pulling her under again, Blake sat beside her holding her small hand in his. The crisis was passing. His daughter would be fine. The relief was so profound it left him lightheaded. A soft knock at the door drew his attention. Diana stood in the doorway, hesitant in a way Blake had never seen her before. May I come in? Her voice was quiet, mindful of Lily's sleep. Blake nodded, watching as Diana approached the hospital bed with careful steps. She studied Lily's sleeping face with an expression Blake couldn't quite interpret. something between tenderness and an old private pain. She looks peaceful, Diana observed, keeping her voice low. The resilience of children is remarkable. Blake nodded, too emotionally drained for words. The past hours had left him exhausted, the fear and relief combining into a bone-deep weariness. Diana seemed to sense this, her next words practical rather than personal. I've arranged for a private room. She'll be moved shortly. And I've spoken with HR. Your leave is approved effective immediately. Take whatever time you need. Blake looked up at her, surprised once again by this side of Diana Morgan that seemed so at odds with her fearsome corporate reputation. Thank you for everything today. I don't know how I would have Diana cut him off with a small gesture. No thanks necessary. Some things transcend professional boundaries. Her gaze returned to Lily, something softening in her expression. She's a remarkable child, Blake. You've done well with her despite everything. The unexpected compliment, personal, sincere, caught Blake off guard. Before he could respond, a nurse entered to check Lily's vitals, and the moment passed. Diana stepped back, professional, mask sliding into place once more. I should get back to the office. The Phoenix team needs direction with you here. Is there anything else you need? Blake shook his head, words inadequate for the complexity of what he was feeling. Diana nodded once and turned to leave, her heels clicking softly on the hospital floor as she walked away. Mrs. Harrison appeared in the doorway as Diana left, the two women exchanging brief nods of mutual respect. The older woman took in the scene, Lily sleeping peacefully, Blake beside her looking utterly spent, and moved quietly to the other chair. That's quite a boss you have there, Blake. Mrs. Harrison observed, her tone casual, but her eyes shrewd. Not many CEOs would personally drive an employee to the hospital, let alone stay for hours. Blake nodded, too tired to analyze the implications of Diana's actions or Mrs. Harrison's observations. She's not what people think she is, Mrs. Harrison hummed thoughtfully, settling into her chair with the patient air of someone prepared for a long vigil. Few people are when you really get to know them. As Lily slept on, oblivious to the adults' quiet conversation, Blake found himself wondering just how well he was beginning to know Diana Morgan, and whether the glimpses he'd seen of the woman behind the CEO were changing something fundamental between them, something neither had anticipated nor sought. Outside the hospital room, Diana paused in the corridor, her composed expression belying the tumult of emotions beneath. The sight of Blake with his daughter had stirred memories she'd buried long ago. Of her own childhood, of a father too busy building an empire to attend school plays or bedside vigils, of a mother who had eventually walked away from it all, unable to compete with Morgan Industries for her husband's attention. Diana had sworn she would never repeat her parents' mistakes. She had chosen career over family, power over connection, avoiding the painful divided loyalties she'd witnessed growing up. It had seemed the cleaner choice, the more honest path. Yet today, watching Blake Turner drop everything for his daughter without a second thought, Diana felt the first real doubt about the choices that had shaped her life. The certainty that had driven her for decades, that success required singular focus, that personal attachments were liabilities, suddenly seemed less absolute, less true. And that uncertainty for a woman who had built her identity on unwavering conviction was perhaps the most unsettling development of all. A week after Lily's surgery, life at the Turner household had found a new rhythm. Unlike the previous rigid routine Blake had maintained for years, this one had flexibility woven into its structure. Mrs. Harrison arriving early on the days Blake needed to be at Morgan Industries, before dawn remote work arranged for afternoons when Lily needed her father nearby, and late-night video calls with the Phoenix team when necessary. What surprised Blake most wasn't the complexity of balancing these competing demands, but how natural it felt, as if some part of him had been waiting for this challenge. The telescope Diana had sent, professional grade with computerized tracking and high-resolution optics, stood assembled in the corner of Lily's room, waiting for her full recovery in a clear night. The gift had affected Blake more deeply than he cared to admit, not just for its generosity, but for what it represented. Diana seeing his daughter not as an inconvenient attachment, but as a person with passions and curiosity worth nurturing. Blake checked his watch as he loaded the dishwasher after breakfast. The board meeting was in 2 hours. With Lily's fever gone and her recovery progressing steadily, Mrs. Harrison had assured him she could handle things at home while he attended what might be the most consequential presentation of his career. Still, leaving Lily never came without that familiar twist of anxiety, the legacy of losing Emily so suddenly. Dad, you're doing that worried face again. Lily sat at the kitchen table, drawing with colored pencils, her expression knowing beyond her years. I'll be right here when you get back. Promise. Blake smiled, caught in his daughter's perceptive gaze. His mind flashed back to Emily, how she'd had that same ability to read him, to gently pull him back from his internal spirals of concern. Sorry, Princess. Just thinking about the meeting. Lily set down her pencil, regarding him with that serious expression that always made her look so much like her mother. You're going to save the Circle Factory with Miss Morgan, right? She had already intuitively grasped what was at stake, filtering Blake's carefully simplified explanations through her 8-year-old understanding of the world. That's the plan. Blake finished with the dishes, drying his hands and coming to see what Lily was drawing. It was a simple but recognizable rendering of 3 figures standing beside what appeared to be a circular structure, unmistakably Lily Blake, and a woman in what looked like a business suit. The factory, Lily nodded, adding another line to the drawing. And that's Ms. Morgan, helping you save it. She seemed to understand something about the connection forming between Blake and Diana that Blake himself was still coming to terms with. Blake's phone buzzed with a text message from Diana. Car arriving in 30 minutes. Prototype secure in boardroom. Reed appears overconfident. Good sign he doesn't know what's coming. DM. Even in text, Diana's strategic mind was evident. The corporate battle with Marcus Reed had escalated from underhanded tactics to outright sabotage. What had begun as Blake's professional opportunity had transformed into something far more personal, a fight not just for Project Phoenix, but for Diana's leadership and the future of Morgan Industries itself. You should wear your blue tie, Lily suggested, suddenly startling Blake from his thoughts. Mom always said it made you look smart. Blake felt a familiar pang at the mention of Emily, but it wasn't the sharp grief of years past. Instead, it was something gentler, a melancholy warmth, the bittersweet recognition that his wife lived on in their daughter's memories and observations. She did say that, didn't she? As Blake changed for the meeting, selecting the blue tie as advised, he found himself reflecting on how much had shifted in such a short time. 3 months ago, he had been deliberately anonymous at Morgan Industries, avoiding advancement, focusing solely on creating stability for Lily after Emily's death. Now he stood at the center of a corporate power struggle, leading a revolutionary project and, most unexpected of all, developing feelings for a woman he had once viewed solely as an untouchable executive figure. What would Emily think of all this? The question surfaced not with guilt, as it might have even weeks ago, but with genuine curiosity. Emily had always been his advocate, pushing him to reach further than his natural caution allowed. Would she approve of Project Phoenix, of Diana Blake? Could almost hear Emily's voice, not from some supernatural place, but from his deep knowledge of who she had been. You've been existing, not living. It's time to step back into the world, Blake, for yourself and for Lily. The sleek black car's Dormom. That car arrived precisely on time, the same discreet driver who had transported Blake and Lily to Morgan Industries during her illness. Blake kissed Lily goodbye, accepted Mrs. Harrison's reassurances, and stepped into the vehicle with the weight of the day's importance settling around his shoulders. At Morgan Industries, the atmosphere was charged with tension. Blake made his way to the executive floor where Diana waited in the conference room adjacent to the boardroom, reviewing their presentation one final time. She looked up as he entered, relief briefly crossing her face before her professional mask returned. I wasn't sure you'd make it. Her voice was steady, but Blake had learned to read the subtle shifts in her tone. Lily's doing better, much better. Blake set his laptop down, moving to stand beside Diana as she scrolled through the presentation slides. The fever's gone, and she's back to asking 1,000 questions about everything. She told me to wear this tie, actually. Said it makes me look smart. Diana's lips curved slightly, the hint of a genuine smile. Smart daughter. She turned to face him fully, her expression growing serious. You understand what we're facing today? This isn't just about Phoenix anymore. Marcus has aligned half the board behind Westfield's offer. He's convinced them I'm too personally invested in my father's legacy to make rational business decisions. Blake nodded, the full scope of the day's stakes clear. It's not just about proving Phoenix works. It's about exposing what Marcus has been doing to undermine it. Precisely. Diana's gaze was direct, unflinching. If we fail today, Westfield takes over Marcus, likely becomes their inside man with a golden parachute, and everyone associated with Phoenix, especially you, will be first on the chopping block. What remained unspoken hung between them, that Diana herself would be forced out. Her leadership ended her father's company, absorbed by competitors. For a woman who had rebuilt Morgan Industries into an industry leader, who had sacrificed personal connections for professional success, the loss would be devastating. We won't fail, Blake spoke with a certainty that surprised even himself. The evidence against Marcus is irrefutable, and the prototype works. The board will see that Phoenix is the future, not a Westfield acquisition. Diana studied him for a moment, something softening in her expression. Your confidence is unfamiliar to me, Turner. In my experience, people are either overconfident to mask incompetence or cautious to avoid blame. You're neither, Blake shrugged slightly. Engineering mind. I know what works, what doesn't, and what remains uncertain. Phoenix works. The evidence against Marcus is solid. Those are facts. The uncertain element is the board's response, but that's beyond our control. We can only present our case clearly. Diana's laugh was brief but genuine. That's why I chose you for this. That clarity of thought. She glanced at her watch. The board arrives in 20 minutes. Let's review the demonstration sequence one more time. For the next 15 minutes, they worked side by side, refining the presentation, ensuring the prototype demonstration would proceed flawlessly. Their collaborative rhythm had become so natural, it was hard to believe they'd been working together for only a few months. Diana's strategic mind complemented Blake's technical expertise, each anticipating the other's thoughts with a synchronicity that felt almost like telepathy. As they finished, Diana's assistant appeared at the door. The board members are arriving, Ms. Morgan, and Mr. Reed has requested a few minutes with you before the meeting. Alone. Diana's expression hardened, the CEO mask sliding firmly into place. Tell him I'm in final preparation with Mr. Turner. If he has something to say, he can say it in the boardroom. The assistant nodded and withdrew. Diana turned to Blake, her voice low. He's making one last attempt to intimidate me. Standard Marcus tactic: isolate, then pressure. Blake felt a surge of protectiveness that he knew Diana wouldn't appreciate. Still, he couldn't help asking, should I step out, give you space to deal with him? Diana's response was immediate. Absolutely not. We present as a united front. Besides, she added with a hint of the vulnerability she rarely showed, I'm finding your presence stabilizing. The admission, small but significant from a woman who prided herself on self-sufficiency, shifted something in the air between them. Before Blake could respond, the boardroom doors opened, and Marcus Reed entered, his tailored suit and confident swagger, projecting the image of a man who believed victory was already his. Diana. The boardroom's ready. He nodded curtly at Blake, barely acknowledging his presence. Turner, still playing engineer, I thought you'd have realized by now you're just a pawn in a larger game. Blake met Marcus's gaze, evenly refusing to be baited. I know exactly what game we're playing, Reed, and I know which pieces have been moving in the dark. Marcus's expression flickered briefly, composure cracking, before he restored his smooth facade. Bold words from someone who was a nobody until recently. He turned back to Diana. Last chance, Diana. Withdraw your opposition to the Westfield offer. I can still guarantee you a position in the restructured company. Dignity intact, Diana's smile was glacial. That's generous of you, Marcus, but I've never been interested in dignity without integrity. Shall we join the board? The Morgan Industries boardroom was imposing by design. Rich wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a massive table that separated the board members from those presenting to them. The prototype sat on a display podium covered with a black cloth for dramatic effect. Board members filed in, taking their assigned seats, expressions ranging from curious to openly skeptical. Blake felt the weight of their collective scrutiny as he took his position beside Diana at the head of the table. These were people who controlled billions in assets, who made decisions affecting thousands of employees, who were accustomed to wielding power without question. And today he and Diana would challenge them directly. The meeting began with formalities, minutes from the previous session, procedural matters, a brief overview of the agenda. Diana handled these with practiced ease, her command of the room absolute, despite Marcus's attempts to interject with pointed questions about the Westfield offer's financial benefits. When the time came for the Phoenix presentation, Diana stood her voice clear and authoritative. Before we begin, I want to thank the board for convening on short notice. What we present today will fundamentally change the trajectory of Morgan Industries, not just through Project Phoenix itself, but through what it reveals about forces working against our company's independence. Blake advanced the first slide as Diana outlined Phoenix's core innovations, explaining how the circular manufacturing design would revolutionize production efficiency while dramatically reducing costs. She spoke with the precision of someone who understood not just the business implications, but the engineering principles behind them, a reminder that before becoming CEO, she had been an engineer herself. As Diana concluded the overview, Marcus leaned forward, his expression skeptical. This all sounds impressive in theory, Diana, but theory doesn't translate to shareholder value. Westfield's offer provides guaranteed returns, not speculative technology that's already months behind schedule. Diana's smile was thin but confident. You raise an excellent point about delays, Marcus, which brings me to the next section of our presentation. She nodded to Blake, who advanced to a slide showing server access logs and timestamp data. Perhaps you could explain to the board why Project Phoenix's secure servers were accessed using your credentials at 2:17 a.m. 3 days ago, precisely when critical files were corrupted. The accusation hung in the air, board members exchanging glances as Marcus's face flushed with surprise and anger. That's absurd. I was nowhere near the office at that hour. Diana's response was calm, measured. Strange then that security footage shows you entering the building at 1:52 a.m. and leaving at 3:04 a.m. Blake, would you show the board? Blake advanced to the next slide, security camera footage clearly showing Marcus entering the building during the time in question. The evidence was damning, impossible to dismiss. What followed was corporate warfare at its most ruthless. Marcus attacking Diana's leadership, questioning Blake's qualifications, dismissing Phoenix as an expensive fantasy, while Diana systematically dismantled his arguments with evidence, logic, and the quiet authority that had made her such a formidable CEO. Board members watched the exchange with increasing discomfort, clearly unsettled by the implications of Marcus's betrayal and the extent of the sabotage against Project Phoenix. The chairman, a silver-haired man who had been with the company since Diana's father's time, finally interrupted. These are serious allegations, Ms. Morgan. Do you have concrete proof that Mr. Reed has been actively working against company interests? Diana nodded to Blake, who brought up the next series of slides, altered financial projections, manipulated test results, evidence of communication with Westfield executives that directly violated Reed's non-disclosure agreements. The case they built was methodical, irrefutable, showing a pattern of deliberate sabotage designed to force the board toward acquisition. When the evidence presentation concluded, the boardroom was silent. Marcus sat rigid in his chair, all pretense of confidence stripped away. Diana let the silence stretch, understanding its power in this moment. The chairman broke the tension finally. While this evidence is concerning, it doesn't address the fundamental question before us today. Is Project Phoenix viable? Can it deliver the returns necessary to justify rejecting Westfield's offer? Now came the moment Blake had been preparing for, the demonstration of the Phoenix prototype. He stepped forward, moving to the covered display. Despite the sabotage, despite the accelerated timeline, the prototype was ready. Not perfect, but functional enough to prove the concept's viability. Engineering isn't about theories, Blake began, his voice steady with the confidence that came from expertise. It's about solving real problems with practical solutions. He pulled away the cloth, revealing the prototype, a miniaturized version of the circular manufacturing system that was Phoenix's core innovation. For the next 20 minutes, Blake demonstrated the prototype's operation, explaining in clear, accessible terms how the circular design created efficiencies impossible in traditional linear manufacturing. He showed how production flow was optimized, how materials moved seamlessly between stations, how the integrated system reduced waste by 47% while increasing output by 38%. The board members leaned forward, their skepticism gradually giving way to genuine interest as the prototype performed exactly as promised. Blake concluded with the economic projections, hard numbers showing Phoenix's impact on Morgan Industries' bottom line within 6 months, 1 year, 5 years. This isn't theoretical, he emphasized, aware of the board's growing engagement. This is real practical innovation that puts Morgan Industries ahead of every competitor in the field, including Westfield. Why sell to them when we can outperform them? The question lingered as Diana took control again. Her final argument directed not at Marcus, but at the board itself. My father built this company on innovation, not acquisition, on creating value, not merely extracting it. She moved closer to the prototype, laying her hand on it with a gesture that was almost reverent. Project Phoenix continues that legacy. The choice before you isn't just financial, it's about what kind of company Morgan Industries will be for the next generation. The chairman called for a brief recess to consider the presentation. As board members filed out, many stopping to examine the prototype more closely, Marcus remained seated, his expression a mixture of fury and calculation. When the room had emptied except for the three of them, he finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous. You think you've won? This isn't over, not by a long shot. There are other ways to ensure Westfield gets what it wants. Diana met his gaze evenly. Are you threatening me, Marcus? Because that would be unwise given the evidence we've just presented to the board. Marcus stood, adjusting his tie with practiced nonchalance that failed to mask his anger. Not a threat, a reality check. You've gotten too personal, Diana. This company was your father's obsession, and now it's yours. But business isn't personal. It's about results. In one way or another, Westfield will get the results they want. As he stalked from the room, Blake fought the urge to follow, to confront him more directly. Diana's hand on his arm stopped him, her touch light but firm. Let him go. His threats are empty now. The board has seen what he is. Blake wasn't so sure. There was something in Marcus's tone, a certainty, that suggested he still had cards to play. This type of man didn't concede defeat easily. Should we be concerned about what he might do next? Diana's expression was thoughtful. Possibly. But right now we focus on the board's decision. One battle at a time, Turner. They waited in tense silence for the board's return. When the members filed back in, their expressions gave nothing away. The chairman called the meeting to order, his tone formal, but not unfriendly. The board has reviewed both the evidence regarding Mr. Reed's activities and the Project Phoenix demonstration. We have reached a decision. He paused, his gaze moving between Diana and Blake before settling on Marcus, who had returned to his seat with carefully constructed composure. In light of the evidence presented, Mr. Reed is suspended pending a full investigation of the allegations against him. His voting rights on this board are temporarily revoked. Marcus began to protest, but the chairman raised a hand, silencing him. As to Project Phoenix, the board votes to continue funding and development with increased oversight, but full support. The Westfield offer is rejected as not in the best interests of Morgan Industries at this time. Relief washed through Blake, so profound he had to steady himself against the table. Diana's expression revealed nothing, her professional mask firmly in place, but he caught the slight tremor in her hand as she gathered her notes, the only sign of the emotion she must be feeling. As the meeting concluded and board members dispersed, Marcus made a hasty exit, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The chairman approached Diana, his expression serious but respectful. Well played, Diana. Your father would be proud. But watch your back. Men like Reed rarely accept defeat gracefully. Diana nodded, accepting both the compliment and the warning. Thank you, Richard. I learned from the best. Her father, Blake, realized the chairman must have been a contemporary of Diana's father, perhaps even a mentor to Diana herself. When the boardroom had emptied, leaving just Blake and Diana, she finally allowed her professional facade to crack. A small smile broke through, not of triumph, but of profound relief. We did it, Turner, against considerable odds. Blake nodded, his own satisfaction tempered by exhaustion from the emotional roller coaster of the past days. Lily's surgery, the sabotage, the high-stakes presentation. Phoenix deserved to survive. It's going to change everything for Morgan Industries. Diana studied him, her gaze thoughtful, assessing. And for you, what does this victory change for Blake Turner? The question caught him off guard, personal, direct, touching on the transformation his life had undergone since accepting leadership of Phoenix. Before he could formulate a response, his phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Harrison. Lily asking for you. Fever's still gone, but she's missing her dad, drawing pictures of telescopes and planets all morning. Blake showed Diana the message, an unspoken request in his eyes. She nodded immediately, the CEO momentarily set aside in favor of the woman who had driven him to the hospital, who had sent flowers and a telescope, who seemed to understand that some priorities transcended professional obligation. Go, we'll celebrate properly another time. Give Lily my best wishes for her continued recovery. As Blake gathered his things to leave, Diana added more hesitantly than he'd ever heard her speak, perhaps when she's feeling better. You might both join me for dinner to properly thank you for everything you've done for Phoenix, and to thank Lily for sharing her father with the project during such a difficult time. The invitation, so personal, so far beyond their professional relationship, hung in the air between them. Blake found himself nodding, a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with professional satisfaction and everything to do with the woman standing before him, complicated, brilliant, increasingly human to his eyes. We'd like that, both of us. Diana's smile then was different from any he'd seen before, not the controlled professional expression she showed the world, but something genuine, perhaps even shy. Her next words were quiet, meant only for him. I'm beginning to think some risks are worth taking, Turner, even for those of us who built walls to avoid them. Blake held her gaze, understanding the layers of meaning in her statement. I've learned recently that safety isn't always found in hiding from life. Sometimes it's found in facing it head-on with the right people beside you. The moment between them, stretched laden with possibility, with unspoken feelings neither was quite ready to name, but both increasingly willing to explore. Finally, Diana glanced at her watch, breaking the spell. Your daughter is waiting. We can continue this conversation another time. Blake nodded, recognizing both the dismissal and the promise in her words. Until then, Ms. Morgan. The drive home gave Blake time to process the day's events. The confrontation with Marcus, the board's decision, Diana's invitation. 3 months ago, his life had been defined by careful routine and deliberate anonymity. Now he stood at the center of Morgan Industries' most ambitious project, had helped defeat a corporate takeover attempt, and was cautiously exploring feelings for a woman he had once viewed only as a formidable CEO. As the car pulled into his driveway, Blake caught sight of Lily at the living room window, her face lighting up as she spotted him. She disappeared from view, and moments later the front door flew open, her small figure bounding down the steps despite Mrs. Harrison's cautionary call to be careful of her incision. Dad, did you save the Circle Factory? Lily's eyes were bright with excitement, her recovery evident in the energy with which she wrapped her arms around him. Blake lifted her, gently mindful of her still healing wound. We did, Princess. Phoenix is going forward. Mrs. Harrison appeared in the doorway, shaking her head with fond exasperation at Lily's exuberance. She's been drawing spaceships and planets all morning, telling me how you and Ms. Morgan were going to save the day with your circle powers. Blake carried Lily inside, the weight of the day's tension finally lifting as he stepped into the familiar comfort of home. He set her down carefully on the couch, where she immediately reached for a drawing pad filled with colorful renderings of planets, stars, and what appeared to be the circular manufacturing design of Project Phoenix, reimagined through a child's understanding. Look, I made designs for the telescope. Lily flipped to a page showing a figure that was clearly meant to be Blake, standing beside the telescope Diana had given her. And I drew Miss Morgan, too. She flipped to another page where 3 figures, unmistakably Lily, Blake, and Diana, stood hand in hand beside what appeared to be both a telescope and the circular factory. The simple image, his daughter's perception of the connection forming between the 3 of them, brought a lump to Blake's throat. You've been busy today. The telescope's still a bit too advanced for you to use on your own, though. Lily rolled her eyes with the particular exasperation only children can perfect. I know that, Dad. That's why Ms. Morgan has to come over and show us how to use it. She's smart like that, right? Mrs. Harrison, gathering her things to leave, caught Blake's eye with a knowing look. She's been talking about Ms. Morgan all day. Quite taken with her, it seems. Rather like someone else I could mention. Blake felt his cheeks warm, surprised to find himself actually blushing like a teenager. It's complicated. Mrs. Harrison's smile was gentle. Life usually is dear, but sometimes complications turn out to be exactly what we need. She patted his arm. Now I've left dinner in the oven. Lily's had her medication. Call if you need anything. After Mrs. Harrison left, Blake settled beside Lily on the couch, feeling the day's adrenaline finally ebb, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness tinged with satisfaction. Lily curled against him, her warmth and solid presence, the most effective remedy for stress he'd ever found. Is Ms. Morgan happy, too, about saving the company? Lily's question was casual, but Blake sensed the perceptiveness behind it. Yes, I think she is. Blake hesitated, then added, and guess what? When you're feeling better, she'd like us both to have dinner with her. Would you like that? Lily's face lit up. At her house, the fancy one you told me about, with the glass walls and the view of the whole city. Blake nodded, smiling at his daughter's excitement. That's the one. Lily considered this, her expression suddenly thoughtful beyond her years. She seems lonely, Dad, like you were before, but different. Like she doesn't know she's lonely. The observation, so insightful, so compassionate, caught Blake off guard. He sometimes forgot how perceptive children could be, how they often saw straight to the heart of things adults had learned to complicate. What makes you say that? Princess Lily shrugged, the gesture strangely adult on her small frame. The way she looked at us in the hospital. Like she was watching something through a window, something she wanted but couldn't have. She paused, then added with the simple clarity of childhood, maybe you can help each other not be lonely anymore. As Lily drifted off to sleep that evening, exhausted by her day of drawing and excitement, despite her recovery, Blake sat in the kitchen reviewing Phoenix documentation on his laptop. But his mind kept returning to Lily's words. She seems lonely, like you were before. Maybe you can help each other not be lonely anymore. Had he been lonely? Not in the conventional sense. He had Lily, after all, and Mrs. Harrison and colleagues he was friendly with, if not close to. But there was a particular kind of loneliness that came with grief, with the loss of a partner who had known you completely, who had shared your burdens and your joys. A loneliness that persisted even when surrounded by others. And Diana. Her loneliness seemed different, not born from loss, but from choice, from walls built deliberately to protect herself in a world that would use any vulnerability against her. The glimpses he'd caught of the woman behind the CEO suggested someone who had sacrificed connection for achievement, who had perhaps only recently begun to question that bargain. His phone buzzed with a text message. Diana's number appeared on the screen. Dinner at my place, Friday 7 p.m., Lily's choice of dessert. And Blake, thank you for seeing me, the real me, when no one else did. The message stirred something in Blake's chest, a warmth he'd almost forgotten, the particular lightness that came with possibility, with doors opening rather than closing. He typed his response. We'll be there. Some people are worth seeing clearly, even when they try to hide behind corner offices and CEO titles. He set the phone down, feeling a smile tug at his lips. Outside the kitchen window, the evening sky was clearing after a day of cloud stars becoming visible one by one. In a few days, when Lily was stronger, they would set up the telescope in the backyard, exploring distant worlds together. New horizons, Blake thought, both literal and metaphorical. Blake checked on Lily one last time before turning in himself. She slept peacefully, her stuffed otter clutched against her chest, a drawing of the Circle Factory on her bedside table. Beside it lay another drawing, the three figures, hand in hand, looking up at stars. Blake gently touched the drawing, this child's vision of what might be, what could be, if he was brave enough to step forward into a future different than he'd planned, but perhaps better than he'd dared hope. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Blake and Lily no longer defined solely by loss, no longer just surviving, but beginning to live again. And perhaps, just perhaps, they wouldn't be facing it alone. That night, Blake slept more soundly than he had in years, without the restless anxiety that had been his constant companion since Emily's death. In his dreams, he saw not the past, but the future, Lily growing, thriving, the three of them together under stars seen through a telescope's lens, worlds previously invisible, suddenly clear and bright and full of possibility. In her penthouse across the city, Diana Morgan stood at her floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing at those same stars. For the first time in decades, the success she'd achieved today felt different, not because Phoenix had been saved or because Marcus had been defeated, but because she had not stood alone in the victory. Someone had seen her, really seen her, and had not turned away, had in fact drawn closer. She touched the window glass, cool beneath her fingers, separating her from the night sky beyond. For so long, she had viewed life through such barriers, observing but not participating, protected but isolated. Now, with Friday's dinner approaching, with Blake and Lily Turner about to step into her carefully controlled world, Diana felt those barriers beginning to thin, to become permeable in ways both terrifying and exhilarating. The professional triumph of the day paled beside this more personal revelation that perhaps the walls she had built to protect herself had instead become a prison, and that freedom might be found not in greater isolation, but in the risk of connection. In seeing and being seen, in the courage to step beyond the boundaries she had maintained for so long. Diana turned from the window, moving through her elegant but sterile penthouse with new eyes. By Friday, she decided this place would feel different, less like a showcase, more like a home, a place where a child could feel welcome, where new beginnings might take root and grow. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Diana Morgan looked forward not to a business achievement, but to a simple human connection. Dinner with a man who saw beyond her title, and a child who drew her holding hands with her father beneath a sky full of stars. The future stretched before them all, Blake. Lily Diana different than any of them had planned, but shimmering with possibilities none had dared to imagine. Not a perfect future, certainly, but one where wounds might heal, where loneliness might give way to connection, where walls built against pain might gradually transform into bridges toward joy. And perhaps that was enough. Perhaps that was everything.